Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal interesting facts of the week from June 30th to June 4th, 2025. First, in the week of June 30th through July 4th, the world around Sonny began to unravel in ways he had not fully anticipated. Although he had faced countless threats before, the culmination of recent events converged into a storm more volatile than anything he had weathered in years. The baptism of Daisy, once a symbol of peace and new beginnings, spiraled into chaos, placing Sonny at the center of a growing firestorm. The church had barely emptied when a palpable tension lingered in the air, and beneath the smiles and ritual, something darker had already begun to take root. Jens had been waiting for his moment, and now it appeared he was ready to move. His intentions were no longer subtle, and the message was loud and clear. If Sonny refused to yield, then those around him would pay the price. Every choice Sonny made now carried a shadow, and every step he took seemed stalked by an unseen predator. The notion that this vendetta would remain confined to boardrooms and whispered threats had vanished. Jens wanted blood, and he wasn't bluffing. Sonny's instincts screamed at him to prepare for the worst, not for himself, but for his children, his lovers, his allies. Yet for all the danger Sidwell represented, another threat loomed in a courtroom rather than a back alley. Justine had been steadily building her case, gathering evidence in silence while Sonny remained distracted by Sidwell's antics. Her ambition, laced with righteous fury, painted Sonny not as a man defending his family, but as a criminal who had evaded justice far too long. Behind her composed demeanor, Justine was relentless, and when the moment came, she moved decisively. The warrant was not just a legal maneuver, it was a statement. Sonny, for all his influence, could still bleed in the hands of the system. The betrayal that followed struck deeper than any legal blow. Natalia, once seen as a reluctant ally, suddenly reappeared with information that shifted the tide dramatically. Whether manipulated, coerced, or simply fed up with the collateral damage surrounding Sonny's world, she chose to step out of the shadows and deliver what Justine needed to tighten the noose. The shock of her decision reverberated throughout Port Charles, igniting speculation, rage, and heartbreak. Sonny's trust, fragile and selective, had once again been misplaced, and now he would have to pay for it. As Monday dawned, Sonny found himself surrounded not by family but by cold concrete and harsh fluorescent lights. The PCPD brought him in with quiet satisfaction, their years of frustration finally crystallized in the sight of him behind a locked door. Gone was the image of a man untouchable, invincible, protected by codes and oaths. For a brief moment, he was just another suspect, stripped of the armor his empire had given him. The booking process was methodical, and each question, each fingerprint scan, echoed the reality that his world was no longer under his control. But Sonny had never survived alone. Jason, ever the silent sentinel, stepped out of the shadows with practiced calm. While others debated strategies and fretted over consequences, Jason acted. His loyalty had been tested more than once, and yet here he was again, not asking, not hesitating. Whether it was arranging legal strategy, orchestrating protection for those Sonny loved, or simply standing outside that cell as a reminder that he wasn't alone, Jason moved with the precision of a soldier answering the call of duty. At the same time, Diane launched into action with a ferocity that surprised even those who knew her best. This wasn't just another case, this was war. Every piece of paper, every precedent, every loophole was her weapon, and she wielded them like a warrior fighting for someone who deserved more than the label society was trying to pin on him. Her frustration with the DA's office was barely contained, but her resolve never wavered. To Diane, Sonny wasn't a gangster, he was a man being cornered by power-drunk officials and traitors with convenient timing. As the week wore on, the pressure mounted. Sidwell's men were still circling. Justine's office was leaking stories to the press, and Port Charles began to whisper, some in support, others in condemnation. The weight of Sonny's legacy hung in the balance, and every passing hour felt like a countdown to something irreversible. He wasn't just fighting for freedom, he was fighting for the right to remain the protector of his own family. And yet the silence from some corners, Nina, Ava, even Michael, stung with implications that could not be ignored. Through it all, Sonny's mind remained focused. He had seen worse, survived worse, but never had he been forced to fight so many battles on so many fronts at once. The danger wasn't just physical. It was emotional, spiritual, psychological. And while the war had just begun, one truth remained unshakable: Sonny would not go down without a fight, not now, not ever. Second, as the chaotic week in Port Charles unfolded, Willow found herself more determined than ever to cling to the only strategy she believed might save her fractured family: marrying Drew. In her heart, it wasn't romance that fueled her actions, but desperation, guilt, and the quiet hope that perhaps tying herself legally to Drew might present the image of stability the court demanded. Despite the mounting whispers about Drew's character, despite the scandal he had brought upon himself during the press conference, Willow ignored the noise. She saw the courthouse as a battlefield and their marriage license as armor. Every step toward that altar wasn't one of love, it was war. Drew's reputation, once manufactured with care and calculated press appearances, had taken a significant hit during the very public disaster of his last press event. Instead of looking like a reformed businessman, he appeared unstable, evasive, and arrogant, qualities that stood in direct contradiction to what family court judges sought in parental figures. But Willow, unwilling to acknowledge those signs, clung to the belief that a legal union could neutralize the bad press and cast them as a stable couple. She was gambling everything: her credibility, her emotional well-being, and most heartbreakingly, her relationship with her children. The upcoming custody hearing loomed like a storm on the horizon. With every tick of the clock, Willow and Drew accelerated their timeline, preparing for an immediate wedding. There would be no fairy lights, no soft music, no emotional vows whispered under a sky full of stars. This would be a courtroom marriage, fast-tracked and functionally transactional. It was a far cry from the marriage Willow once dreamed of, but sentimentality had long since died. All that remained was the fierce instinct to survive the system and get her children back. To the outside world, it looked like love. To Willow, it was survival. What Willow hadn't anticipated was the silent sabotage taking place behind the scenes. Sidwell, always lurking in the background with his penchant for manipulation, had found a way to tip the scales. His bribery of Judge Eva Heron shifted the narrative entirely. While Willow and Drew raced to present the illusion of unity, the judge assigned to their case was already quietly preparing to hand Michael the advantage. It wasn't about facts or fitness to parent, it was about power, influence, and quiet backdoor dealings that eroded any sense of fairness in the process. Drew, as calculating as he tried to be, remained oblivious to the growing threat Sidwell posed inside the courtroom. If he noticed the judge's dismissive tone, the cold glances, the strange scheduling delays, he said nothing. Maybe he was too focused on the optics, too blinded by his own belief that he could outmaneuver anyone. Or perhaps he had become so used to manipulation that he failed to detect it when it turned against him. Either way, the trap had been set, and with every legal document they filed, Willow and Drew stepped closer to an outcome they could not see coming. Elsewhere in Port Charles, Trina was beginning to confront her own betrayal. The man she had begun to trust, Kai, had slipped into Drew's orbit in ways that reeked of hidden agendas. Curtis and Jacinda had been planning something, and Kai had taken that knowledge and fed it straight to Drew. Trina had given Kai more than information, she had offered him the benefit of the doubt, the chance to earn her trust. But now that trust was fractured. What stung wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that even those closest to her could be manipulated by the very people trying to crush Willow. With each day, the walls closed in tighter. Willow clung to Drew in public, smiling for photographers, nodding along during legal strategy meetings, reciting what needed to be said about their future together. But when the cameras were gone, her expression often faltered. She wasn't built for this kind of war, not emotionally, not spiritually. The pressure of pretending, of crafting a version of herself that didn't tremble under scrutiny, had begun to erode the last remnants of the girl she once was. And still, she refused to stop. The custody of her children was the final prize, and she would not falter before the verdict was read. Meanwhile, Drew continued to bask in the illusion of control. He walked through each day as though everything was unfolding exactly as he had planned. He saw the wedding as a political move, a clean solution, a box checked off. But he never noticed Willow's fatigue, the strain in her voice, or the quiet despair behind her eyes. To him, this was business. To her, this was pain wrapped in desperation. And even as the wedding date crept closer, Willow began to wonder, when the dust finally settled, would she have won her children back, or would she have lost the last of herself in the process? And so the week barreled forward with mounting dread. Courtroom games and whispered betrayals replaced the comfort of family and truth. Sidwell's bribes, Drew's pride, Kai's duplicity, and Trina's heartbreak all swirled together into a storm that threatened to consume them all. But for Willow, there was no going back. She had chosen her path, and now she had to see it through to the end, no matter what it cost. Finally, as summer settled over Port Charles and the 4th of July approached, Emma found herself drawn deeper into a seemingly innocent mystery that had unexpectedly turned personal. The little dog she had rescued in the park with Gio had quickly become more than just a lost pet, it had become a bridge between her guarded world and something far more complicated. What began as a tender moment of shared empathy between two young people now hinted at hidden intentions, shadowy manipulations, and an elaborate scheme designed to play on Emma's compassion. She had always had a soft heart, especially for animals, and someone, it seemed, knew that far too well. The dog's reappearance in Emma's life began to raise questions she hadn't initially considered. Why had the owner not come forward sooner? Why was the dog's collar tag so meticulously cleaned, yet devoid of contact information? And why, of all people, had Vaughn suddenly taken an interest in the animal rescue group Emma had recently joined? On the surface, Vaughn's charming demeanor and warm smile made him seem like another idealistic volunteer. But Emma, increasingly aware of the shadows moving beneath her world, couldn't shake the feeling that his timing was far too convenient to be coincidence. Gio had his own reservations about Vaughn, though he kept them mostly to himself. Protective by nature and fiercely loyal to Emma, Gio watched Vaughn's every move with growing suspicion. He saw the way Vaughn positioned himself near Emma during volunteer meetings, the way he asked questions that sounded friendly but dug deeper than necessary. Vaughn's compliments were just a bit too perfect, and his stories always seemed to echo Emma's own ideals a little too closely. While others were charmed, Gio remained on edge, wondering if Vaughn's sudden involvement in the group was part of a much bigger plan. Unbeknownst to most, Vaughn's interest in animal rights was not born of empathy or passion, it was strategy. He knew Dalton had placed his faith in Emma, had trusted her with secrets and positioned her closer to missions that were never meant to intersect with ordinary life. Vaughn had been watching from a distance, calculating when and where to strike. The dog was merely a prop, a distraction tailored to catch Emma off guard, disarm her defenses, and slowly erode the protective circle Dalton had constructed around her. Vaughn didn't need to win Emma's love, just her trust. As the 4th of July neared, Port Charles prepared for celebration. Banners went up along the waterfront, fireworks were ordered, and couples planned romantic evenings under the stars. But for Emma, the approaching holiday came with a different kind of anticipation. Something inside her stirred uneasily, a quiet alarm that refused to be silenced. She couldn't shake the thought that she was being used, that this newfound connection to Vaughn wasn't organic but orchestrated. Dalton had warned her once that proximity to him came with consequences. Now, it seemed, those consequences were drawing dangerously close. Dalton himself remained at a distance, focused on missions that required silence and precision. But he watched through his own channels, noting Vaughn's movements with increasing unease. The last thing he wanted was for Emma to be caught in the crossfire of covert games, yet her involvement had already gone deeper than either of them intended. Vaughn had become more than a nuisance, he was a threat. If Vaughn succeeded in twisting Emma's loyalty, it could compromise more than Dalton's mission. It could destroy the trust between them, a bond Dalton had never admitted was the one thing he feared losing most. Meanwhile, Gio grew more agitated. Every time Vaughn brushed past Emma or found another reason to linger after meetings, Joe's fists clenched tighter. He didn't have Dalton's intelligence network or his war-honed instincts, but he had something more dangerous, gut-level intuition fueled by love. Gio had been through enough to know when someone wasn't who they claimed to be. He tried to warn Emma, gently at first, but she waved him off. The idea that someone might use a helpless animal to get to her was too cruel to accept, until she began to see the signs for herself. And so, as fireworks prepared to light up the sky in celebration of independence, Emma stood on the edge of a much darker truth. The dog she had saved might have been the start of something innocent, but now it represented a gateway to betrayal. Vaughn's mask was slipping, and Emma, who had always led with her heart, now had to rely on something much colder, instinct. If she made the wrong move, Dalton's operation could be compromised. If she waited too long, Vaughn might worm his way deep enough to fracture everything. Port Charles may have been dressing up for a night of festivities, but beneath the surface, a silent war was brewing. The betrayal wasn't just political or criminal, it was personal, emotional, and psychological. The lines between friend and enemy blurred by charm, circumstance, and calculated deception. Emma had a decision to make, and as the countdown to the holiday finale ticked down, one truth became inescapable: sometimes, even the smallest dog can carry the heaviest secrets. As the echoes of the 4th of July fireworks faded into the humid night air, Emma stood apart from the crowd, the leash of the small dog still wrapped loosely around her wrist. What had once been an endearing rescue now felt like a puzzle piece in a far more calculated game. She replayed every interaction with Vaughn, the way he had appeared just when she was emotionally vulnerable, how he effortlessly inserted himself into the animal rights group she had joined, and how his questions always seemed to hover too close to her work with Dalton. She had initially dismissed Joe's warnings as protective jealousy, but the unease that had steadily crept into her heart could no longer be ignored. Vaughn wasn't just a well-meaning stranger, he was studying her, waiting for a misstep, and the dog had been his opening move. It was now clear that the kindness she extended had been weaponized against her. Dalton, though physically absent, had never taken his eyes off Emma. He had trusted her not just with information, but with a role in something larger than she ever could have anticipated. Watching Vaughn circle her like a hawk ignited a silent fury in him. Vaughn's infiltration had not only endangered the mission but had also put Emma in direct psychological peril. Dalton had chosen her for her instincts, her clarity, her heart, but he had underestimated the emotional toll of walking this line between trust and betrayal. Vaughn's manipulation had created a fracture not only in the mission's integrity but in Emma's spirit, and that damage, if left untreated, could be catastrophic. Now, with the clock ticking, Dalton knew he had to act, not just to protect the work, but to protect the woman who had unwittingly become its most vulnerable point. Meanwhile, Joe's loyalty burned like a quiet flame. He saw what Emma didn't want to see, and while he lacked Dalton's resources, he had something just as powerful. Unfiltered honesty. He didn't play games or manipulate, he simply watched, listened, and waited for the truth to rise to the surface. With each passing day, his distrust of Vaughn deepened, and his resolve to stand between Emma and harm hardened. Vaughn's casual flirtations and faux concern couldn't fool Gio, who recognized the subtle signs of performance in every movement. He may not have had proof, but he had conviction. And when the moment came, Gio would not hesitate to confront the threat directly, consequences be damned. He loved Emma too much to let her be a pawn in someone else's war. Now, as the night wore on and Port Charles settled into a false sense of peace, a storm quietly brewed just beneath its surface. Emma, caught between instinct and emotion, prepared to face the growing suspicion in her heart. Dalton, watching from afar, strategized his next move with precision and dread. Gio stood ready to fight not just for Emma's safety, but for her clarity. And Vaughn, still lurking under the guise of sincerity, continued his performance with dangerous patience. The small dog, now dozing beside Emma, remained the most innocent piece in a deeply layered deception. But as the truth inched closer to the surface, one reality became certain: Emma would have to choose whether to remain the girl who saved others or become the woman who finally saved herself.